Welcome back to TechRadar. I'm Bill Thomas, U.S. Computing Editor.
And I'm Matt Phillips, TechRadar's video producer. And yesterday we were treated to a PlayStation 5 specs breakdown by Mark Cerny. And I think that stream wasn't exactly what a lot of people were hoping for. You know, they decided to live stream it on YouTube. And I think there were a lot of gamers, a lot of your average gamers in the comments there, not fully understanding everything Mark was saying, maybe thinking the presentation was a little bit dry. So we thought we'd jump on camera now and have a chat to you guys and explain what he was talking about maybe in a bit more detail, what it means for your average gamer, and whether or not you should even really care. Does that sound about right, Bill?
Yeah, it sounds about right. There was a lot of numbers.
There's a lot of numbers. We're talking about some teraflops, but teraflops aren't important anymore, apparently. Xbox, I'm sure, would say differently still, but we'll get to that. So the first thing, your Bill, Mark Cerny kind of split his presentation up into three areas. So we'll try and hit those areas as well. First of which was pretty much explaining the thought process behind putting an SSD in the PS5 and how important that is. So, Bill, maybe you can explain very briefly what the difference is between an SSD and what is currently in the PS4.
So, the PS4 uses a 5400 RPM spinning hard drive, which is basically, it's a little metal disc inside of an enclosure that spins, and then there's a little needle that'll search for information on that disc to pull up the data it's looking for. These hard drives have been used in computers for like decades, but right now, since they're old technology, they're a little slow. So what an SSD it's flash memory. So instead of having this like little metal arm that has to go searching for the information manually, it can bring up that information a lot faster.
A lot faster. So Mark even said 100 times faster. So Mark Cerny in his presentation said, no more load times. Load times are going to be a thing of the past on the PS5. And I struggle to believe that. Like, okay, so your face maybe would hint that that's probably not true either. Surely as these games progress, the load times are going to come back. Like maybe you know, your remaster of Spider-Man won't have load times like it does now. But is that the right thinking, or am I thinking about that the wrong way?
Well, so it depends on like what kind of loading screens you're talking about. When you're first loading a game up, it's still going to have to load all that data from the SSD. It's going to be a very short loading screen.
Right.
But for example, we've had SSDs in PCs for a very long time now, and we still have loading screens there.
Sure.
I think loading times versus a console, like let's say you're playing Bloodborne and you die to a boss because everybody dies in that game.
A lot, yeah.
You end up waiting almost 2 minutes between deaths for that loading screen to load. With an SSD, that could be cut down to 10 seconds.
Right. Fantastic. Well, that sounds good to me.
So loading screens aren't going to go away.
Right.
They're just going to be so short that it's going to be almost as if they're gone.
You're not going to notice. And one of the things that I found particularly interesting is they kind of talked about this idea that at the moment game designers kind of design around that fact. When you're going from one place to another, you might experience a long elevator ride or or particularly winding path because it's loading that next area. Whereas with this, that shouldn't be an issue. So we might see quite a big change in game design as well as...
In my specs analysis piece on TechRadar.com.
Go to the link at the top. You find it.
Yeah. One of the examples I used was Skyrim rather than having like an elevator ride, because I think that the difference is going to be more stark in games like that.
Right.
Where let's say like you're out exploring the world and you stumble upon this place you want to explore. Right. And then you like hold down E or whatever button is on a controller. I'm a PC person. I don't know what to tell you.
Square. Bill.
Yeah. You push the button to enter, go into like open the door to go into the thing, and then you're treated to a load screen. And the reason why it basically has to do that is because hard drives are so slow. The game designers had to program around the fact that they can't load the entire world into the system memory because there's just simply too much data for them to do that.
Of course, yeah.
So rather than having to like selectively pick pieces of data to load into system memory so that you can have like the overworld and then like all the little like dungeons or whatever, the game can just access the information straight off of the SSD. So like when you're going into a world, or like you're going into a dungeon, you can just open the door and the game will be able to read that almost as fast as like reading it off of RAM. So there's not that, but it doesn't have to swap a bunch of data around every time you change location.
Yeah, so in the time it takes you to open that door, you'll be in and you'll be going into that next area, and it won't be...
Yeah.
You won't even necessarily have to fade to black, or...
Yeah, like, this is theoretical, and this is me basically taking the information that Cerny was giving and kind of like interpreting it for what I believe it would be best used for. But
sure, and
we could see giant open world games that you only have to load. You'll only see a loading screen when you're first loading into the game, or maybe when you die and you go back to a checkpoint and it has to like reload all that data.
Yeah, which is fascinating. I'm really intrigued to see how that will change game design. Like, will something be done now that could never be possible before, that we would never even conceived of a thing we wanted until now? So it'll be really interesting to see.
I think we're gonna see like gigantic open worlds in the next generation. Like, you think of like Fallout 4, where it's just like Boston. What if you had the whole state of Massachusetts?
Yeah.
Or like
fascinating stuff. Can't wait to see
the entire country.
But if you did have the entire country in Fallout 5, segue, is 875 gigabytes enough? Because 875 gigabytes is what they said they're going to put into this thing internally. You are going to be able to expand it, although that comes with its own complications we might get into in a second. But 875 gigabytes, that didn't blow me away.
I know that it's like this like hotly contested thing, but really the difference between the PS5 SSD and the Xbox Series X SSD in terms of capacity is 125 gigabytes.
Sure.
These days in modern like games, I'm seeing like one game take up that much space. So we're talking about the difference of having 10 games installed versus 9 games installed. I don't think it's a huge deal. Especially because, as Mark Cerny mentioned, there's a NVMe SSD slot rather than the proprietary one on Microsoft's console.
Right. So I wanted to get to this. So theoretically, and I may have misunderstood this, but this is how I understood it. Hopefully some of you at home did as well, so I'm not a complete idiot. So you are going to be able to insert extra, not memory cards, full SSD hard drives. There are going to be at least one open bay for that in your PlayStation 5 that I'm assuming, have to open your PlayStation 5 up, slot this new drive in, and you'll be good to go. But that new drive doesn't even really exist yet. They're kind of open market drives that they're not sure which ones will work and which ones won't, and they don't have a standard size, so it might not even fit in the PlayStation. So there are a lot of issues, it seems like, that need to be resolved before that's a reality. Is that right? So, yes and no. Right now, there aren't very many PCIe 4.0 SSDs on the market, which is the interface that the PS5 SSD will be using. Right. They are on the market yet, but because there's PCIe 4.0 wasn't even publicly available until July 2019. Right. So it's a relatively new thing. PCIe 4.0 cards or SSDs, they're not really taking full advantage of the technology yet. And right now, if you want a 1 terabyte SSD, again, off the top of my head, you're looking at $500, $600. Wow. Okay. Which is why, like, leading up to these spec reveals, when I was being told that we're going to be getting an NVMe SSD, I was a little skeptical because I'm like, if they're doing a PCIe 4.0 because it's an AMD Zen 2 thing, it's going to be pricey. And again, it'd be super expensive. Sure.
Yeah. Theoretically, if you have a PCIe 4.0, like if your motherboard is capable of, if you have an X570 board, you can get an SSD that's as fast as the PS5. They're just very expensive and not really commercially available yet. Right. So this might be a thing that we see a year after the PS5 is people start expanding their hard drives. What do you think could come sooner? Well, so Computex comes in a few months, if it's still going to be a thing. If it's still a thing. And that's typically where we see a lot of these drives being put out. I think we're going to see PCIe 4.0 SSDs exploding onto the market starting this summer.
Sure.
But again, that's speculation on my part.
Sure.
I don't really know.
But the more that come out, the price will come down. I wonder, do you think then, because I think they were saying in there that there's no standard size for these things, so they might not fit into your PlayStation 5. Do you think companies will start re-looking at that now, thinking, oh, well, we want to make one that can fit in the PlayStation 5 because people will buy it to then go in their PS5, and that's an extra market for us?
Most NVMe PCIe M.2 drives, they're about like this long and they're like that thin.
Right.
And you just like slot them into a little thing and you screw them down on your motherboard. They take up like no space at all. If Sony doesn't adopt that form factor, it's going to mean that a lot of that basically people are going to have to buy SSDs that are custom made for the PS4.
Yep.
Because right now, basically all the SSDs that are targeted towards consumers that are PCIe, NVMe, M.2 are using one form factor.
I'm with you.
There are outliers.
Yes. Yeah, sure. And maybe you picked it up and I didn't. I'm not sure. But did he talk about just one slot being available for that, or were there multiple slots? I'm not sure that was talked about.
He didn't specify, but I would be very surprised if there's more than one.
Fair enough. Well,
Yeah.
Let's move on to the second part of his presentation then. And this is where it all started to really go over my head. So he talked about AMD's custom chip that they're using in it. You just mentioned now the Zen 2. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. It's
fantastic.
Yeah.
And then sorry, go on. No.
It's based on the same...
Explain what the Zen 2 is for us, yeah.
So if you're at all familiar with PC components, right now there are AMD Ryzen processors that are basically everywhere.
Right.
Those started with the AMD Zen microarchitecture back in 2017. Then it was AMD Zen Plus in 2018, and then last year AMD Zen 2 came out. And AMD Zen 2 is behind all the AMD Ryzen 3000 chips, with the exception of the ones with the letter G after them, because those are still Zen Plus. They're budget things.
I guess my question is how important is that to the performance of the console? And how does that compare to the Xbox?
Well, so they're both based on the same Zen 2 platform.
Right.
So the difference in performance between them is going to come down entirely to clock speed, which is PS5 is slower.
Right. Interesting. So does that have anything to do with teraflops, which according to Mark Cerny are no longer that important?
No, because teraflops are... So basically what a teraflop is a unit of measurement.
Okay.
So like when you're measuring floating point compute performance, that's measured in teraflops. And there's this like, you can calculate the teraflops of the graphics card in your computer by following a formula, which I'm not going to go into right now.
Okay. Good. Thank God. We were already getting to the edge there. I was about to jump off, but
go on all day. Don't worry.
But Xbox, it is interesting that Xbox is really they're big on teraflops. They want you to know how many teraflops are in their systems. And in this presentation, Mark Cerny spent a lot of time kind of explaining why teraflops don't necessarily mean everything, right? Which is obviously an important message for them to get out because they have less teraflops than the Xbox. But does that actually matter? Is what Mark Cerny saying true in your experience?
It's a complicated topic.
Sure.
On one hand, teraflops are a really easy way for a layperson to get an idea of how powerful a graphics card is, or a GPU, because it's just one number, right?
Sure.
On the other hand, it doesn't tell you the whole story.
Sure. Is it a sort of situation of what's the saying? Work smarter, not harder, right? You might have more teraflops, but if you're using them smarter, which I think is what PlayStation were kind of trying to say they're doing, then maybe that's better.
Yeah, maybe. I think we haven't seen like games that are using this hardware.
Sure.
And so we don't know how developers are using the power that's being leveraged. But I think one of the things that's been super misleading is the way that he completely brushed off that measurement. Because, I agree that if there are two graphics cards that are both like a 10.3 teraflops of compute power, they're not necessarily gonna give you the same amount of performance between the two. Because
Okay.
you have to take drivers, you have to take memory bandwidth, you have to take like the actual like how many like transistors it has or whatever. I have to take all that into consideration.
Right.
But when the PS5 has 10 point something teraflops of compute performance and the Xbox Series X has more than 12, that's 20% difference in performance.
Sure. You're gonna notice a difference, you think?
Yes. So one of the things that Cerny was talking about is that the GPU in the PS5 will turbo boost up to 2.23 gigahertz, whereas the Xbox Series X stays. I know. This will all make sense in a second.
Okay. I'm with you. I'm sticking with you. Come on, Bill. Let's do it.
And the Xbox Series X stays at like 1.8.
Okay.
Right? So it's clocked higher. But on the other side of it, the Xbox Series X has, if I remember correctly, like 56 compute units, 52 or 56. It's one of those two numbers, where the PS5 has 36, which means there's a 31% difference in the amount of shader cores or stream processors between the two. So we're talking about a difference in 20% in clock speed versus 30% in like the raw hardware that's available.
Okay.
And I've been testing graphics cards for years.
Yeah.
In every single case where we have a higher clock card with less stream processors versus lower clock card with more stream processors, the more stream processors you have is way more important than the clock speed.
Right. Really interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So then, and again, this is going to sound like a very newbie question. People might fall out with me here. Then they went on to talk about ray tracing. Yeah. What is ray tracing? Should I care? Does it have anything to do with what we've been talking about so far?
It has. You should care because it's really cool, and it has everything to do with what we've been talking about.
Amazing! Look at that.
So computationally complex. So basically, what ray tracing is a way to render lighting in a scene.
Okay.
Right? So basically, the very easy way to explain it is, let's say you're rendering a game scene in a room, right? Mm-hmm. And you have a source of sunlight coming through the window.
Sure.
What ray tracing will do is it will track every single ray of light as it bounces around the room to give a realistic lighting effect, rather than rasterization, which is what they've been using for lighting for the last 20-something years, where they had to artificially place little light sources around the room to mimic the natural effect of light.
I'm with you.
Ray tracing just will naturally track where the rays of light would naturally bounce from.
Fantastic. Okay, that makes perfect sense to me. That's the first time that ray tracing has made sense to me, and I do now care. As a video producer, lighting and stuff, like I get that. That makes sense to me. I get why I should care about it. So they did very briefly mention backwards compatibility, and that they've somehow sourced the top 100 games, and that almost all of them are going to be available. What are your thoughts? That almost all, I think, is a bit of a cushion for them, right? How important do you feel like this is?
I think it's massively important for people, because people are going to buy the PS5 in like 6 months or whatever. I don't know what date it is. Don't judge me.
They haven't announced the date, I don't think, yet. They're still just saying
like
holiday 2020.
What's 6 months from now? That's September? Yeah, probably won't be out by then. No. People are going to drop $500 on this thing. And at first, there's just historically speaking, when a new game console comes out, there isn't like a ton of video games available for people to play on it. Mm-hmm. So they're just going to not have anything to play. And without backwards compatibility, there might be no reason for someone to turn it on until more games come out.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, it was interesting. This really wasn't a presentation that was aimed at your average consumer. This was a GDC developers presentation. But
it was
with Xbox, exactly, which is why I got you on for this, Bill. But Xbox recently came out with their smart delivery system, right? If you buy Halo Infinite on your Xbox One, you're going to get the best version of it on Xbox Series X when that releases. And I thought, which is incredible, surely PlayStation have to do something similar. This could have been a good time to talk about that. Maybe they were really caught on the back foot when Microsoft announced that, and then now they're thinking, wow, we really have to get our shit together.
Well, so I'm extremely thankful that the PS5 is including some form of backwards compatibility, but like the versions of backwards compatibility on the PS5 and Xbox Series X are so massively different from one another.
Yeah.
Because the way Cerny was talking about it, and I might have misunderstood this because, again, it was complicated stuff.
There was a lot going on.
But basically, the way the GPU is going to operate is it's going to emulate the GPUs in either the PS4 or PS4 Pro. Whereas the Xbox Series X will natively support all the games without having to do emulation. So
right. So that is a significant difference.
There was an example that was used in the Digital Foundry article where Microsoft revealed all these specs.
Yeah.
Where they took Gears 5 and upscaled it to a native 4K 60 FPS with like no extra like programming really needed. So like that will happen natively. When you get an Xbox Series X, your Xbox One games will run at 4K.
Right.
Just like that. And then they're also finding ways to like put like HDR into games. So like another example from that article is Gears 1, but with HDR. Something that is not supported even on PC right now.
Right. Fantastic. Well, looks like Xbox are still coming out on top, but I think I'm still going to go PlayStation. I've been PlayStation for so long.
And they do have the exclusive game thing. So, I mean...
Very true. Although we didn't get any games in this presentation. A lot of people were mad about it, but...
I was expecting NAC 3, so...
Mate, fingers crossed. Still fingers crossed. So another thing they talked about then, very briefly, was a cooling solution. And they said, we're going to have more details on this soon. Because obviously everything we've talked about so far is going to draw a lot of power, make a lot of heat. But the PlayStation 4 cooling system, well, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't suck. I've written it here in my notes. It sucks because whenever I turn my PlayStation on, it sounds like a Boeing 747 taking off in my bedroom. So yeah, what do you think we should be expecting from the PS5? Are the fans going to kick up just as much noise? Is it going to be 90% vents? What's it going to be?
It needs to be a very heavy cooling solution.
Yeah.
Mainly because the CPU and the GPU are using variable clock speeds.
Right.
So like the clock speed of both the GPU and CPU will like change depending on how hot it gets, basically. So when I heard that, I was like, so a lot of people are like, they'll get these consoles, put them on, something in their living room, and they'll let them sit for a few years. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
There are people who are responsible and clean their consoles all the time.
Not me. But
it's not very common. So like what's going to happen is if it has a heating solution that's similar to the PS5, it's going to get covered. It's going to like suck in a lot of dust.
Similar to the PS4, sorry. You said PS5, I understood.
It's going to suck in a lot of like dust and heat is going to skyrocket.
Yeah, of course.
And so then the clock speed of both the CPU and the GPU are going to drop, which could end up meaning that performance will suffer over time.
Okay. So one of the things they were trying to explain in there, and maybe this isn't relevant to this, and if it's not, we'll get back on track, but they were talking about how this is a variable frequency system so that it's almost always running at like top speed as far as I understood it, right?
Yeah, that's very optimistic. Yeah. That's
optimistic.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that's optimistic? Like you don't think that's possible? Or for me, that seems... does that mean it's always running as hot as it possibly can? Is that what that means? Or...
Yeah, well, so I'm... Again, this is going to be based on assumptions based on...
Sure. We're interpreting what we heard.
Hardware. Because, like, it's using Zen 2 processors. So the way that Ryzen 3rd generation works and the way it boosts, because we're basically talking about boost clocks, is it will push as high as it can as, heat allows. But if it's starting to bump up against its thermal limit, it's going to start going down in clock speed. And so if it's going to like, Cerny is probably right that it's and right off the bat it's going to be sitting at those boost clocks as much as possible. But again, people generally have a console for 5-6 years, and over that time, I don't see those boost clocks staying.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Surely, when you max something out like that for an extended period of time, 5-6 years, it's going to deteriorate faster, right? Is that the right way to think about it?
Well, like if you keep your console cool and you keep it clean and you really like are really into like maintaining it.
Yeah.
Silicon, the way that it like deteriorates in performance over years, it's a lot more sturdy now than it was 2 decades ago.
Sure.
So I don't think if you take care of your PS5, you're going to see those boost clocks stay at or near that level. But again, there are people that aren't going to do that. And it's just going to be the heat thing that's going to drive it down. I don't think the processor itself is going to really deteriorate in that time frame because it takes like a decade for a CPU to die from that kind of thing.
Okay, fair enough. Well then, so we'll move on now to Sony's final point in the presentation, which again, I kind of came back around and understood most of this bit, which was 3D audio and their sort of big push into 3D audio and really taking a hold of that. What were your thoughts on that? I've never experienced 3D audio in any particular sort of, extensive way, I guess, or any way that blew me away, certainly. So what's your experience with it? Is it really worth the hype?
So audio isn't really my strong point, but there is a bunch of 3D audio that I've experienced through like PC component or PC peripherals like headphones.
Sure.
I think it's neat, but right now, the way I was kind of looking at it was they're like dedicating a chunk of silicon to this 3D audio processor while also delivering underpowered hardware elsewhere in the system.
Right.
And right now, the way it was being talked about, it's like it's going to be available for people with headphones right off the bat. But
Yeah.
if you're playing through your TV speakers, you're not going to be able to take advantage of that until Sony finishes developing the technology for TV speakers.
Exactly. Sorry, go on.
Might happen soon. I don't know, but
they talked about it very much like this is a dream, right? This is a 5-10 year plan. They didn't give those numbers, but that's what we were kind of expecting. So
it better not take 10 years.
Better not take 10 years. Is that what you're saying? Fair enough. So in your opinion, in comparison to the Xbox, you said earlier, they did this big deep dive recently on Xbox with Digital Foundry and kind of dropped all the specs. So in your opinion, looking at the two side by side, is there a massive difference? Is it really going to make a difference next generation?
I think it could, but there's a lot of information that we don't know.
Sure.
The Xbox Series X could end up being more expensive than the PS5, which would make up for that difference in power.
Right. Interesting.
Because I think the Xbox Series X is almost being put out there as like the Xbox Pro, Xbox One X, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I think you're right. I think there's been rumors of it. I think potentially we see a sort of dual release of the Xbox Series X, maybe with an Xbox Series S or whatever.
Yeah, because there's the Project Lockhart that we just don't know anything about yet.
So, but then I wonder, is it a good business move to launch the two side by side? How many people are you going to have spend the extra money and adopt the better version versus, I don't know. It's an interesting discussion to have, I guess.
Yeah. So if they're like similar prices and the Xbox Series X is supposed to go straight up against the regular PS5, I think the exclusive library for the PS5 is going to keep it afloat no matter what happens, right? Because I'll be getting that to play The Last of Us 3 or
God of War
Horizon
2
or whatever.
Exactly.
Whereas I don't really need to buy an Xbox Series X because I'm a computing editor. I have all the top computing stuff. But
it's interesting.
Xbox games on PC.
I think Xbox, I don't think you could really claim that they won this current generation, but they certainly made a lot of big hits with backwards compatibility, Game Pass being such an incredible value proposition. There is,
and play anywhere.
And play anyway, exactly. And they've made such a push to make those things affordable. I think you can still get Game Pass for $1 for your first 3 months or something. They do ridiculous deals all the time. If they said, look, the new Xbox is an extra £100 or $100, but you get 4 or 5 months of Game Pass, which means you have all these games ready to go as soon as you get your Xbox Series X, PS5 has 4 or 5 games at launch or whatever, and we've got all of this. I don't know. It could pull people in.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, again, like I want to see it in action.
Yes,
before
of course.
I make any judgments.
Yeah,
because consoles, like, looking at this straight from like a PC component, like, point of view.
Yeah,
the Xbox Series X is definitely stronger. It's more powerful. This isn't even a matter of interpretation. It is more powerful.
right.
But we're talking about very customized machines that are going to be using custom operating systems that are going to like be for reasons I am not smart enough to go into. We could see the PS5 games looking better than Xbox Series X, even though the Xbox Series X has more powerful hardware.
Right. Yeah. It's going to certainly be interesting to see. Listen, Bill, before we sign off, I want you to speculate wildly. I want you to give me a price tag for the PS5 and a spot-on release date.
Well, release date, I'm assuming it's probably going to be like November 20th or something, just because historically that's when consoles usually come out.
Okay, I'm with you.
For price, if I was going based on computing hardware that's equivalent, probably costs about $1,500 to $2,000.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how powerful this stuff is.
Incredible. But we know that console manufacturers are usually willing to take a bit of a hit on the console because they know they want to get people on the ecosystem and stuff like that.
The bit is the key operative term there.
Exactly. How big is that bit going to be?
I think we might end up seeing these consoles hit $600-700.
Wow. Okay. That would upset a lot of people. I know I think the 500 price point is kind of what people are hoping for with this. But yeah, it'd be super interesting to see what happens.
Expensive hardware.
Very expensive hardware indeed.
We could end up seeing this come out for $500, and if that happens, I'm going to recommend everybody buy one of these consoles because it's going to be the
Bill's
same.
Gonna have 2.
It's going to be the same as like a $2,000 gaming PC. It's like why?
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? Right, fantastic. Thank you for joining me, Bill. Appreciate it a lot. Appreciate the insight. Remember to head over to techradar.com to read all of Bill's more in-depth analysis on all this stuff and everything else computing. And head there as well for all your tech news and reviews.